let there be light. Hey there, it's me, Josh. Welcome to Story Time. Today we're going to be reading Mr. Clumsy, not Mr. Clumsy, Mr. Clumsy, if I can get my words right, by Roger Hargreaves. Super excited, get comfy, get ready wherever you are, because we're about to delve into Story Time. Love it. Okay. It was a rather nice morning. In the sky, the sun was up, shining. In the trees, the birds were up, singing. But in a rather scruffy house in the middle of a field, somebody wasn't up. Can you guess who that somebody might be? His alarm clock went off. It's Mr. Clumsy, isn't it? Yep. Look at his house. A little bit of a clumsy mess. Mr. Clumsy woke up and reached out an arm to switch off his alarm clock and knocked it onto the floor. Whoops, he said. That's the third alarm clock I've broken this week. Mr. Clumsy, as you might have guessed, was a rather clumsy fellow. And we've actually already read about Mr. Clumsy just a little bit. He's the cousin of Mr. Fussy and visited him in the Mr. Fussy story. If you maybe missed that one, you can go and watch it. But now we're finding out all about Mr. Clumsy alone. Let's see what happens. He got out of bed and switched on the radio. The knob came off in his hand. Whoops, he said. That's the second radio I've broken this month. Uh-oh. He stumbled down the stairs. The postman had been, and there was a letter waiting for Mr. Clumsy lying on his doormat. He picked it up and went into his kitchen. First things first, he said, and took a slice of bread out of his bread bin and popped it into his toaster. Now, he thought, I wonder who this letter is from. It's him stumbling down the stairs. A bit clumsy. He looked at the letter in his hand, but the letter wasn't in his hand. What was in his hand was a slice of bread. I don't understand it, he said. Where's the letter gone? Can you guess where the letter had gone? That's right, he'd put the letter in the toaster instead of the bread. And there it was, browning nicely. Whoops, he said, fishing it out. Ouch, he said, dropping it. It's hot. Don't put a letter into the toaster, anybody. Mr. Clumsy bent down to pick the letter up, but in doing so, he banged his forehead on his kitchen table, and in doing so, he fell forwards and got his head stuck in the bread bin. All of which wasn't surprising, really. As we said, he was a rather clumsy fellow. In fact, he was a very clumsy fellow. Actually, he was the clumsiest person in the world. And there he is, stuck in the bread bin. And that very same morning, after he'd managed to get the bread bin off his head, Mr. Clumsy went to town, shopping. First things first, he said, and went into the bank to get some money. There he is, strutting along, still happy though, even though he's a bit clumsy. Which is good. And somehow, while he was at the bank, Mr. Clumsy, while he was writing a check, managed to spill ink all over the banker. Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. There's the banker, covered in ink. He went into the butcher's. Morning, butcher, he said cheerily. I wonder what's going to happen. Oh. There he goes, and then he somehow managed to trip over his shoelaces and somehow managed to fall into the butcher's shop window and somehow managed to finish up with a string of sausages round his neck. Whoops, he said. There he is. Wonder if he'll have to pay for those now. Mr. Clumsy's next call was the supermarket. Just inside the door there was a huge pyramid pile of cans of soup. Well, you can imagine what happened, can't you? See that big pile of cans? Wonder. Exclaimed Mr. Clumsy. Soup would be nice for supper, and he picked up a can. Not a can from the top of the pile. No, not Mr. Clumsy. He's clearly going to grab one from the middle. Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy, and went on his way, rubbing his head. So he's knocked over the whole stack, because he's grabbed one from the middle, and it's made all the ones above fall. On his way home, he called in at the farm for some eggs. And somehow, while he was crossing the farmyard, he managed to trip up and somehow, as he was falling, he managed to grab hold of the farmer, and somehow they both managed to finish up in the duck pond. Splash! Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. It's him tumbling into the farmer there. Please, said the farmer, as they sat together in the duck pond, in future, can I deliver your eggs to you? That's extraordinarily kind of you, replied Mr. Clumsy. Don't mention it, muttered the farmer. A little duck pond conversation there. Mr. Clumsy went home, first things first, he said, and went for a bath. But as he was stepping into his bath, his foot somehow managed to slip on the soap, and he somehow managed to turn a somersault, and he somehow managed to land with his head in the linen basket. Whoops, said a muffled voice. It'll be more like, whoops. First the bread bin, now laundry basket, or linen basket. Later he went downstairs for supper. Soup from the supermarket, sausages from the butcher's, and eggs from the farm. Or rather, soup from the saucepan that had boiled over, sausages from the frying pan that had caught fire, and eggs, oh dear, very, very scrambled eggs. A normal Mr. Clumsy sort of supper. That was nice, he said, leaning back in his chair. Uh-oh, Mr. Clumsy, don't go leaning back in your chair too much, man. Crash! Whoops, said Mr. Clumsy. I think I'd better go to bed. And he did. And that's the end of the story. Good night, Mr. Clumsy. Mr. Clumsy leaned over to turn off his bedside light and, oh dear, whoops. Doesn't say what he did, but do you think that he somehow managed to break that clumsily? Yeah. Well, thank you so much for reading the story with me today. I hope you liked it. I'll be back again with another story really, really, really soon. I'm Josh. This is Story Time. Bye for now, but not forever.